Hey, welcome to where I recap my class at UC Merced. Hi, I'm John. I teach at UC Merced, and I teach a class called Dragons Skills IRL, which is part of our Spark seminar series at the school. Sorry I've missed the last few weeks here. You're feeling under the weather, stuff's just happening. There's a lot going on at my campus right now. There's a lot of infrastructure and bureaucracy happening. And also the weather change has been tearing me up. But I'm here today, and I want to recap the last few weeks, almost 3 weeks worth of work, and talk about what we've been up to, and where we're going. So the last time I talked, we had just had Steve Kenson visit, and we had a second visit shortly after that, about a week after that, with DeAngelo Murillo. So DeAngelo is the author, creator, publisher, all that stuff of Emerald Templars, which is an RPG he, I think, kickstarted. And you can go and find all about it here. Let me see real quick. Here was his I'll put a link. Here was his Kickstarter. And but he was gracious enough to give some time to come visit and talk to my students. My students articulated some great questions for DeAngelo. We spent pretty much the whole 2 hours just talking to him. But I thought I'd go over today and kind of look at some of these questions. And then after that, I want to talk about our line of inquiry, which is our main thrust towards the end of it. And one more kind of fun journal we did. I had my students watch the debut episode of Tabletop News, and I want to kind of share their reactions about that as well. So we'll talk about DeAngelo's visit, we'll talk about Tabletop News, and then we'll talk about the line of inquiry. Hopefully get done with this about 2:45 or so. Let's go ahead and talk about DeAngelo. So each of my students, as I said, they are given some information about DeAngelo, some links, some things to look at, kind of some history, also what he's currently working on and what he's kind of where he's going with it. And so we really approach this from a few perspectives on DeAngelo. One, was that he is a professional dungeon master, so he runs games through Start Playing pretty consistently. He runs a lot more games than I knew he did, which is pretty cool. Two, as a creator of Emerald Templars, what went into that, how the project went, his approaches to that. Three was his Geek Life site, which is his little blog, kind of like news site that he put together. And throughout all of those major parts of his identity, which he is Mexican American, he lives in Arizona, kind of talking about that perspective, which was really important for my class, as the majority, like literally like over 50% of my students are Hispanic. So that was a really important thing to kind of pull on and to look into. And so I have to say that DeAngelo delivered on all fronts as far as a guest goes. He was very conscientious, responsive to the students, was courteous. I mean, overtly courteous. Like I've never had a guest that courteous. It was kind of cool. And it had a good time, and the students really took it. So I'm going to talk about some of the questions that DeAngelo. Then my students also submit 5 questions, and then I try to get one question from every student, and I tend to notice like patterns of questions. You'll have like 5 or 6 students ask the same question, so I only have one. We only have pulling out once because we don't need to keep on asking the same question over and over again. But I want to go through and look at some of the questions that were asked and kind of recall what DeAngelo said. We did record the presentation, but we're only using that for internal uses for students to review and come back at. I don't like to publish those publicly unless someone really insists on it, mostly because I think it's good to keep that as kind of a private thing. And occasionally people, I like to make it so people are comfortable to say stuff they wouldn't normally say, or show behind the curtain a little bit, and it's not like bad stuff. It's just like, hey, there's how things really are at times. So let's go ahead and delve into some of these questions here. So a lot of these questions were like, hey, what's the process of designing an RPG by yourself like? This was a like to head a project out of your own imagination. So Steve Kenson's past of working on RPGs has largely been licensed stuff. He didn't really start doing his own thing, his own creations until later, like especially with Mutants and Masterminds, because he started in Shadowrun, he started with FOSSA stuff, Mech Warrior, Crimson Skies, etc. And a lot of his credits were for other projects before he started doing his own stuff through Green Ronin and other efforts. But DeAngelo's kicking off saying, hey, I'm gonna I think he's worked for some Dungeon Dragon stuff, but not a lot of it. So mostly he's this independent thing. Emerald Templars has been a big thrust of his, and I got to play it back at Big Bad Con. It was fun. It's kind of a cool game. And I gotta say too, one thing I noticed about DeAngelo is his approach to his perspective on Emerald Templars was that, by all means, I had criticisms of that game. By all means, I thought it was great, but like I do have some issues with it. He knew all the issues I was gonna say. He knew exactly what like my issues would be. And I wasn't trying to put out the issues to him, but he knew. Oh yeah, he was open about it and talked about how his next game's gonna rectify those issues. I thought it was pretty cool. I actually really respect that he's like that self-aware. So the question is like, what's the process of designing an RPG from the get-go? So this isn't just a question of like, what's it like working on a team, but if you're the one funding it, what's that like? What's it like to kickstart something? Let's see here. Let's see, that was a major question. Some people are like, what kind of background stuff have you worked in? So where have you worked? Along with college experience too. What was that like to get you to where you are? And some people are also looking at mechanics in Emerald Templars. Once again, I forgot to mention too, DeAngelo is gracious enough to let all my students have access to digital copies of Emerald Templars front to back, so students were able to go through it. Not all the students read through it entirely, but I'd say like almost all of them looked at it and like got some ideas. And there's probably like 3 or 4 that actually read through the whole book. They were really interested. And so that actually brought up some questions like, what's it like to do stress meters and age kind of like with the characters? They hadn't really seen that much. There is a past history of that in like Dungeons and Dragons, for example. It does have like age kind of adjustments here, but they tend to be pretty optional. Where Emerald Templars kind of cores it into the game. And I've seen other games that do that. Like Traveler did that. Or does that. There's a bunch of games that do that, but it was kind of a cool thing that students weren't really aware of, games that like really focused and looked at age. Let's see here. Where'd your inspiration for Emerald Templars came from? So some students asked me about the Satanic Panic, and DeAngelo was kind of, when we did talk about it briefly, he was kind of like, he's younger than me, so I'm kind of on the cusp of the age group that got kind of hit by that. So he hadn't really known much about it. He saw some things, he had heard some things. Whereas like Steve and myself both kind of knew, we actually saw stuff happening. So that was kind of an interesting question. Students don't seem to think that like all of us are involved or they think we're older than we are at times, which is really weird. Yeah. But what more, a great question here is, what would you want to do to expand Emerald Templars? What was your favorite part about making it? There was a lot of students that asked about like what are the difficulties of it, and DeAngelo talked about working with. He talked about getting burnt by a few people on the team initially, people that he contracted out that didn't pan out. He didn't name names, which I really respect. I think the only names he named were people that actually like really worked out and were part of his core team that he really wants to have going forward. But he was like, yeah, I had people that like asked for stuff up front. And I was like, oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, I understand. He's trying to be cool with them, and I got burnt. And so that was interesting hearing to talk about how he handled that. Was really interesting. What inspired you to start Geek Life? He's talked about how he just kind of wanted to see what he wanted to see. None of the stuff is really focused on Arizona Geek Life. And I agree with that, actually. That's a really big thing. The regional geek stuff. We often see a lot of LA stuff. So like Tabletop News, for example, is like out of LA. It comes off as very LA-ish. It has the LA people on it. And you're starting to see these kind of groups kind of put together stuff. So it's like a Chicago-based, Atlanta-based, New York-based, things are kind of pushing out. But as far as like general geek culture stuff, you don't really see it. I mean, like I know being a Central Valley, a geek in the Central Valley is very different than where DeAngelo is. It was when I moved to Los Angeles for a few years, it was shocking how explicit and easy it was to get access to geek culture for me. Like here it was very like niche. I had to like seek people out, and it was very hard. Where there it was just like abundance. So that was kind of cool. So that was kind of a cool thing that students picked up on, is the nuances of geography and geek life, and or being a geek and trying to find the things you want. Students asked about like what was like GMing games. I think DeAngelo said he game masters like 10 games a week or something like that. I mean, it was in double digits. It was a lot. And I was taken aback by that personally because I'd run and start playing games, and I was working a full-time job at the same time as well. But I was running maybe 2 games the most a week, but I was running like 4-hour sessions usually, 3 to 4-hour sessions. I'm also I also there was kind of some question about pricing there, and students could look up his pricing. I've talked about my pricing, and it's kind of a nuanced element of like, do you want to get a lot of people to play and then make money with just the numbers, or do you want to like have high quality, like not high quality, but high number, like a high value? I personally was running just like, say, I'm not charging per person, I'm charging for the whole table, and it's up to 6 people. And I actually had a group out of New Jersey I was running for, and we kind of talked about that a little bit, which is kind of cool, the nuances of running online. I talked about one of my early, because I was GMing very early to start playing. We talked about some of the difficulties there and like the cultural expectations, and then like how we managed to try to work with players that aren't, they pay you to play, but then like they kind of are like, they do jerky things, and you're kind of how to manage that. So we got into some table management stuff, which is kind of cool. My example was a person who was like, there was a magic item they really wanted the game, and I didn't think it fit the scenario, and the other players, and he was like, I want this item, and I was like, well, I don't see that being pertinent, and he basically threatened to give me a negative review if I didn't give the item, and I was kind of like, yeah, we're done here. We don't need to play with you anymore. So it's kind of weird stuff like that. So it's kind of cool. Let's see here. He talked about some questions about fundraising. What was it like to do Kickstarter? DeAngelo spoke about how he approached it, which was, he was like, you need a credit card with about $5,000 ready to go just to balance out stuff, and then once the Kickstarter is over, you pay that stuff off. It was kind of interesting, his perspective of it, and that's a way to go. That's a way to go. I've heard that story before, but he was pretty explicit about it. The students were taken aback by it. That a lot of the work was being done before the Kickstarter, and then afterwards is just to pay off the bills of it. And that's a pretty common technique. You're actually not paying for the project to start. You're actually paying for the backlog of stuff, unless it's like a really physically intensive game. I don't think DeAngelo was getting stuff printed before the Kickstarter kicked off. Because the Kickstarter's also beauty is it lets you know like about how big does your print run need to be. So it's kind of cool. People were really interested in that question. People asked about the creative process of Emerald Templars. Why did you choose the artist you liked? Why? What did you want to see in it? And he started talking about different weapons and different things he wanted to see from around the world, different elements, how he brought stuff in. He talked about some of the foibles he had. He had some issues. He did a few things he mentions that were misrepresented. He made mistakes or presumed things, and talked about how he just rectified it. And I thought that was really beautiful. Like, I think it's a really important thing for students to learn, is that you can make mistakes. And DeAngelo, I made mistakes. I screwed up a few points, and here's how I fixed it. Here's what I did going forward. Here's what I was aware of. And I have a lot of respect for that. So I think that's a cool thing that he talked about. But yeah, the overall the questions were really good. And people a few of the students were really interested in what he had to say, and also like what he has done. But let me go and jump into the reaction. So students didn't just like ask him questions. They have to write a reaction about like what they took away from it. And so let me go and jump into the middle of these a little bit here and kind of run through them. People were surprised at how much research it takes to incorporate a bunch of different cultures. That was great. He talked about some of the wording he used. Basically, the word that DeAngelo used in his thing that he made a mistake on was totem versus talisman. He just swapped out some language, and he said that was good. That was easy. But he didn't understand. He wasn't aware of the issues of using the word totem. He talked about students were interested in how like sometimes you have to put yourself first. You have to like really focus on your own stuff here and set your situation up. That was great. Talk about students were like, startups are hard. That's a big issue. Talk about balancing the personal and work lives. DeAngelo, the father, and talked about like how he kind of wrangles that and how he works through that, and how he purposely sets aside like blocks of time that are family only. Students really like that it wasn't just kind of a blur of things. He he did talk about this too, how he doesn't hire family members or friends to work with. He keeps those pretty sacred. That was kind of an interesting mechanism. I personally have, when I started Colorado Tower, I worked with a friend, and it was great. But the problem was that like it got harder and harder over time, and so I can totally see where that comes in. Let's see here. Let's see here. How he invited people to join his journey to engage in representation. Great top. That's a great thing. People are shocked at the money it takes to start up a game. See, they were really interested in how he used YouTube to like learn skills, like editing skills, layout skills. I thought that was pretty cool. That's kind of a neat bit. Let's see here. Where am I at? Let me see here. This one's. Okay, that one I can't really take about that one. I'm trying to dig through some of these here. What was I saying there? Okay. Invest in yourself. That's a constant skill. Time management is like blocking out time. That's the big one I'm actually seeing from students, is blocking out time. Save time for family. That's what's important. And this student has a whole thing about their own personal situation with that and why that's important to them. A lot of students were interested in how like RPGs are getting more inclusive of cultures. What's interesting about that to me was that like if you go back and look at D&D, it does try to include cultures. The problem with it is that it's all the same voice. It's a very narrow voice set that's actually doing that, and they're not, and they think they know better. And then that's how you get stuff like Oriental Adventures, which is super problematic. I actually did learn, I got to say that from second edition Dungeons & Dragons, I actually learned a lot about like the nuances of pole arms from different places in Europe. About German versus British versus Italian versus French pole arms. I mean, but that's like such like minutia, and it's not like a broad sect. I didn't really learn about like Japanese pole arms until like I was much older. Like I learned about like all these like European pole arms when I was like 10, 11 years old. But then I started really learning about like Japanese like pole arms, which are really fascinating, very, very diverse, or much like different approach, we'll say, in when I was like 17 or 18. So it's kind of interesting kind of hearing about how like the incorporation of different things here. Let me see real quick here. How to be kind of creative, how to approach creativity. Some students actually started pulling on stuff for their line of inquiry paper, how looking at cultural aspects and thinking about the complexities of including cultural aspects. That's good. How to create safe environments. That's a good one. Trial and error is okay. So the student said, yeah, like DeAngelo made some mistakes, and he was open about it and said, hey, but I made an effort to rectify it. I think that's the key here. Let's see here. He talked about how he was a people pleaser for a very long time. He described himself. DeAngelo described himself as a recovering people pleaser, and students were really taken back by that. They hadn't really thought about that. How to let that kind of stuff go. Make sure people understand like deadlines and stuff. So good takeaways. Students really paid attention to it. They were engaged in it. I'm really happy with how that went over. So the next thing I'll talk about is tabletop news. So tabletop news debuted out on the 19th of October. I watched the first episode. I've watched a few of the episodes since. It's coming out weekly, I think, on Thursdays. It's pretty good. Like it was a lot of fun. They really cover a lot of broad bases. I think they have a lot of cool kind of like means of engaging with the community on different fronts, different scales. But the students they kind of understood what it is, which is like for the gaming community, by the gaming community. Okay, that's an interesting perspective. They liked how the segments were compacted on the show, because you watch the show, it's just like compact segments, about half an hour long, 20 minutes long or so, and then you can go and watch the full segment if you want to, which is like maybe 5 to 15 minutes long or something. And they liked how they were kind of interested, like they learned about new elements. Like a lot of students didn't know about the candle, like RPG candles. That's a thing. That's trying to create like different senses. Let's see here. So they're kind of intrigued by that. One of the questions is like, what does this specific one deliver that other news outlets don't? That's the one I asked about them. They like the energy. They thought it was kind of humorous. One of the general gist of this, if I was gonna put anything into like a general like very one sentence summary of what the students' perspective was, it was better than they thought it would be. And I think that's actually a really interesting perspective. Because they kind of went into it, this is gonna be boring, or it's gonna be like kind of just like silly or whatever it was. They're like, no, actually they learned stuff. They did think there was some parts were entertaining and silly, but by all means, they're like, I did get something out of it. They like how the news scaled. Like, so there was big news like Wizards of the Coast breaking ties with Penguin, but then also how like it was even talking about some people's table stuff, very specific. If the student here, hey, what's up, Rafiki? Hey man, one of the students here says like because one of the students in this is actually very interested in starting an analog game club on campus. We have a Dungeons and Dragons club, but it's very focused on RPGs, pretty much not board games or miniature games, and even then it's still pretty like focused on Dungeons and Dragons for the most part. But the student says like if they were going to start an analog game club, they would actually like look at tabletop news for a way of seeing what's kind of relevant, what's important, what's going on in the industry, and what they should be looking for. I think that's kind of cool. That's kind of an interesting way to use the site or the program. Let's see here. A lot of they noticed that a lot of the hosts were tabletop play performers, and this critique kind of goes into that they're kind of concerned about that they're performers, they're not journalists. And so they would like to hear more explicitly about who are actually writing these stories, who's actually investigating this stuff. Do they have like journalism backgrounds, stuff like that? And I think that's actually a fair critique. And I'm kind of, and for those that are interested, if you want to know more about here's Tabletop News' site, go check them out. But that's actually a fair critique, is like they find like it's all performers, not necessarily, or they see a lot of performers on there, but not necessarily the journalists, and they're kind of concerned about that and what that might be. And that has been a critique of a lot of news outlets, especially ones that are pushing this AI, is that they're not focusing on journalists who know how to get to the story, who know how to like develop the story, and pursue the truth or whatever it is, or interview things. So I kind of dug that. That's a fair critique. Let's see here. But they do say that the one thing they like about the performance is that they come with the enthusiasm. That they had a lot of respect about that. And journalists are trained, so I think it's cool. Yeah, as Rafiki said, I think it's a fair critique. I don't think, and that's the thing is like when I've been talking about this a lot when I do the Expanse. I talk about the Expanse video game from Telltale. I critique because I love it. And it isn't to say like it's bad. It's just no one should play this game. It's more like there's some issues I have with it, but overall I think it's actually pretty damn good. I think Tabletop News is the same way. It's overall pretty good. And by all means, they can shift these things. They're easy things to shift. This student really respects how they focus on smaller things to help them grow. That's really cool. They like the pacing of it, that they didn't get bored watching it, but they also said it might be a little too quick. But I think that's kind of an element I'm seeing with it. You have to kind of delve into it and look at like the full features of it. Some of the students found a little corny at points, and I think that's a fair critique too. I did find a little corny at points. That kind of was offsetting for me a little bit, but I also understand that that's an approach of engagement that people have and are kind of used to with the performer element of it. And I think that Tabletop News is coming less from a journalistic. I think it comes out of more of the LA actual play style first, and then to use that style to then present news. And I think there's still some like hammering out and some nuances that can be smoothed out. So and the students are there. This student compares it to SNL energy. And they're kind of interested in that. It's kind of fun. This student really liked that they talked about some underrepresented stuff. They really liked the good. They felt it was good spirits. They liked the segues were a little awkward at times. Let's see here. They felt it was approachable, which I think is great. That's a great element. Let's see here. The student says they found the humor interspliced with news is kind of fun. I think that creates engagement. Yeah, I can see why they would do that. Let's see her. They liked how diverse they liked the diversity of topics and the diversity of perspectives. So that's great in the tabletop perspective in it. Yeah, this one's not really saying too much here. The student found the production incredible. I think I agree. Yeah, I mean it's LA style stuff, so it's gonna be pretty high in quality. The students said they were hooked off the bat. They said they've had a lot of issues with boredom in the past, and they said this was like a really interesting way to kind of like it actually got their interest to such a degree. They kind of went in like a little down on it, or I'm not gonna enjoy it, and they actually enjoyed it pretty quick. Yeah, so they said that's a big part of the production is the energy. They like that you can kind of follow up on topics that they thought the students said was really cool. They like the length of it, 20 minutes. They says it goes pretty fast and covers a lot, so they really appreciate that. I think that's a smart move. Let's see here. They like that they also go into the tabletop adjacent things, so stuff like the candles is really interesting. Yeah, I think that's a great point. They like to see more interviews with people as opposed to being told about the thing. They like to hear the actual people. Let's see here. They liked how it was easy to comprehend. Helping people grow. They liked the war Barbie stuff. They thought that was kind of fun. The kind of art selection of that, or it was like a miniature. They're using like miniatures to do Barbie, like kind of like Warhammer stuff. It's kind of fun. They were interested in the Pokemon story. Let's see here, because they're interested in Pokemon. The students were aware of the Penguin House thing with the D&D rulebook, or with Dungeons and Dragons distribution. So that was kind of cool that they saw the story on there. The student's like, but I don't think I'd keep on watching it because it's not really something I'm interested in. I'm only watching it because I'm in the class. And that's fair. I mean, I appreciate that. Different streamers. They didn't know there would be trading card game stuff. They were talking about the Ninja Turtle RPG coming back. That one's actually kind of controversial for me because it's Palladium, guys. Like, if you guys don't know, Palladium's kind of they're kind of sketchy at points. And the original Ninja Turtle RPG is not. It's a different style of RPG than what we're used to these days, I would say. And there's actually someone put out like kind of their version of it. I may should go talk about that a little bit here. But yeah, the student's like, I didn't realize 20 minutes had passed by the time it finished up. It was so involved. So yeah, they had good perspectives on it. They really enjoyed it. A lot of students were impressed by how well they did it. The purpose of the network. They had a lot of scripted puns. They found, but despite being scripted, they'd also made it immersive, and then they found it kind of witty. The students said I got a lot of information about the hobby that I wasn't aware of, because they've largely heard my perspective or what we got out of Dangerous Games. It's something I focus, and we do read some news articles, but I tend to hit more topics that are like looking at like they're more academic, I'll say, than tabletop news, which is much more I guess enthusiasts, I might put it. Anyway, so yeah, students seem to really enjoy it overall. I think they overall enjoyed it, but they definitely had some criticisms, and I think they were fair criticisms, and I have a lot of respect for my students comment with that. So I'm really happy with what they responded to. Lastly, line of inquiry is up. So we're actually on the thrust of doing our line of inquiry. We actually start our presentations on the 20th. So just over, what is that? Just about a week and a half, we actually start doing the final stuff for the class. And students are solidifying their topic. I have them give me a topic at this point, but I tell them, hey, it can change. It might shift. It might. They did just turn in their first drafts of the line of inquiry, and I tell them it's more of an outline or more of kind of like a. I tell them to use it as an exploratory writing exercise. Just what do you want to look into, and where are you having lack of precision? And the problem we've had though is that some students have only turned in like a single, like it's literally only turned like 2-3 sentences, and I'm like, that's not enough, guys. You need to like really branch out this idea a little bit more. You've had some time to think about this, because I've been asking them. We've had almost a weekly journal about how is your topic developing? How is your topic developing? What do you need? Where do you want to go with it? And I actually talk to each student individually in class about their topics, and so I can actually kind of preview where the line of inquiry is going here. So here's some questions that the students are interested. This one's about the diversification of the hobby. How has diversification occurred? What made it occur? Because we certainly, I mean, there's certainly a lot more diverse creators than there was when I was when I first began the hobby. By all means, a lot more diverse creators. So great question. How has that diversification occurred? And then also the question is like, what are the ramifications of that? You know, what does it do? The students interested in intergenerational communications and play in tabletop role-playing games. I pointed this student actually to the Dungeons and Dragons grandma and like older people that are playing D&D, and the student got really fascinated by how communication from different generations shifts and how that occurs in tabletop role-playing games. So great topic, very, very spot on. This student's interested in autistic youth and how tabletop role-playing games are being used with autistic youth. A great topic, also very precise, like that. This student got really interested in weapon representation in Dungeons and Dragons, so how weapons have been represented over time. It was kind of funny because we talk about how they're like, well, in 5th edition, like spears suck, and I'm like, yeah, they suck in 5th edition, but if you go look at previous editions, you had different like mechanisms. They don't have them. Like there's no set for charge action anymore, and you would have like set for charge like damage modifiers, which was devastating. Like, charging someone with a spear was, if they were ready, was devastating to do. So it's kind of cool. We talk about, so I want them to go look through the history of D&D and how weapons have been represented. If you want to see some shit, go back and look at 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons and look at Nodashis. A Nodashi, like, so two-handed sword back in 2nd edition, I think like you had versus small, medium versus large. Versus small, medium, I think it was like a D12 or something like that, 2D6, like a great sword. But versus large, it was like a D20 damage. And it was like mind-boggling amount of damage for just a non-magical weapon. So kind of cool. Like that's a great way to look at how weapons have changed over time. But they're mostly looking at 5th edition, and I'm kind of like, yeah, you need to go back and look at different editions and how different mechanics and how they worked. This student's looking at like how confidence can be built through tabletop role-playing games, specifically as a game master. This student's interested in contemporary opinions on tabletop role-playing games as a form of expression. So how, as an art form, what's the opinion of it as an art, and how's that changed over time? This student's interested in how fiction, when you looking at the issues of if you start with a lore and then build a system around that and the issues that come up from that. That was really interesting for me. I've seen a lot of games do that. Deadlands was probably the best example of when I was in high school of building a system out of the lore. No, exactly. Yeah, as a fencer, how those weapons would normally work, like a rapier and everything like that. It's very different. I would really recommend. I think 5th edition is their weapons in 5th edition are very flat, in my opinion, and I think that's one thing they want to rectify in the D&D 1 stuff. And if you go back and look, even 3.5 there was a lot. The weapons felt diverse, but 2nd edition you could even see like there was the optional rules of how armor class was modified versus certain types of weapons. That's a really fascinating thing. So you know, like a rapier versus plate mail wasn't great, but then like versus like splint or bandit, it was pretty effective. So it's kind of interesting to think about those perspectives. How like a mace would basically just bludgeon someone in chainmail. Like chainmail wasn't very effective against a mace, kind of stuff. So it's kind of fun. But there's different perspectives on that too. This student's interested in historical tabletop role-playing games as a means of education. Historical RPGs are popular. People like to play those. Those are great. This student's interested in creative identity cultivation in tabletop role-playing games. So how do we use tabletop role-playing games to like cultivate the creative identity? I've had some students in the past look into how do you actually like teach creativity. There's a lot of like controversy about that. Can you actually teach people to be creative? Fair question. This student's interested in tabletop role-playing and marketing and how that's changed and shifted. Absolutely great question. This one's interested in the difficulties of licensed film-based tabletop role-play games. So I was like, hey, go look at Ghostbusters and Indiana Jones RPGs. But there's been a few movies here and there that have been gone through it, and how movies that get licensed in games can work or not work. Aliens had several iterations. Star Wars has had numerous iterations. What's interesting about Star Wars is it wasn't until recently there was like a Star Wars focused system. Usually it was like a generic system that they put Star Wars on. So this student's interested in tabletop role-playing in cover art and marketing, how the cover art's used in marketing, and what the expectation of the cover art is. How enjoyment and communication shifts. Basically, tabletop role-playing games are enjoyed, and how the enjoyment kind of correlates with communication. Kind of interesting topic. I'm not sure exactly where they're going with that, but I think it sounds great. This one's interested on Dungeons Dragons influences, the Dungeons Dragons mechanic influence on video games, which is a consistently big topic. You see it all the time. How different role-playing games can build certain skills. They want to like tighten that up a little bit. Looking at therapeutic uses of tabletop role-playing games, this student hasn't figured out which demographic they want to look at for that, what kind of therapy they want to apply. How players use the imagination. That's what they're kind of saying this student is. Trauma-informed play, great topic. How we can use trauma to inform our play. Absolutely great question. This student's interested about the psychology of character creation. There's a lot of perspectives on that. Like, some people think I want to play like a version of myself, or I want to play something completely different, or I want to play an element of it. I want to try an identity out. How the behavior around character creation goes, and actually in the character creation, not the playing of the character, but how the creation. And there's a lot of different, like I have different approaches to character creation that I do versus like if I rarely do as per the book character creation, because it's you get choice paralysis is a big issue, stuff like that. This student's interested in how the tabletop role-playing game play styles have shifted over generations. Yeah, we're now in like 2-3 generations. How's that working? Looking at emotional responses, how like actually like our emotions actually our real life emotions get incorporated into the game, and how they can affect our play. Absolutely. Dungeons Dragons effects on film and television. Great question. We've seen quite a bit of that actually over the years. And this question's, when does imaginative play become harmful? Like what steps over the when it steps over. So talking about corrupted play, I told them to go back and look at Laycock's book and his citations on corrupted play and see what that kind of goes into. So great topics. A lot of students interested in a host of stuff. One of the things that's surprising here, I didn't have any students that were doing anything that was like computer oriented. I usually have a few students look into, I guess the video game one, but I usually have students that look into AI and role-playing games. And training and such like that. So yeah, pretty diverse set of topics, but I'll have more. They're tightening these topics up still. These are still kind of broad, and I like to have them start someplace and then move into the precision. So I think that's where we're going with it by all means. But very excited about that. Well, look, hey guys, look, I want to say thank you for everyone for hanging out with us. I'm gonna be back on Tuesday night. We're playing Abrax Precipice then. So we have our new our new cast member Claire's gonna be playing with us, so I'm very excited about that. It's kind of a new section of Damocles Cage. And I'll be back on Friday talking about this, talking about the class more as well. So I'm looking forward to that and everything. But yeah, guys, great. It's good to like see where my students are and kind of take inventory. The DeAngelo visit went well. Tabletop News went over really well. I'm not really talking about what else we're doing with the journals, because all the journal stuff we've been doing has led into these topics for the line of inquiry. And so I think next week I'm going to kind of try to take take inventory of where students are on this, and they're kind of let me know their perspectives. I'll be able to reflect on their first drafts a little bit, because like the first drafts they already turned them in. but they're doing peer reviews of them right now, and I won't look at the peer reviews until Sunday, because I want to give them time to like get their own perspective. Because I don't like to give feedback on stuff before the students, because then students just tend to echo what I say, and that there's an authority issue there. And like, I'm like, no, I want to hear what you guys have to say originally. So, all right, guys. Well, hey, I will be back on Tuesday playing Avrox Precipice. I'll be back on Friday doing more of this. Everyone, hey, thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for understanding being delayed on all this and the like. Y'all have a good weekend, guys. Take it easy. I have my screen all screwed up here, so I have to figure out how I'm doing this. All right, I'll see you guys later, man. Take it easy.